So Gary, many people prefer to join us on YouTube and Facebook also.
It's as easy to talk to one as to talk to everyone. So
correct. And moreover, then it is available for eternity on both the channels of Boston Study Group there on Facebook as well as the YouTube.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I'll probably tune in and see what it's good.
Yeah.
So you're recording it then? Yeah.
That's right. We are recording also, and at the same time, we are doing the live streaming on Facebook as well as YouTube.
Okay.
I think we are ready. Yes, we are live on both. Dada, we should start.
Oh, we should start? Okay. Good morning and Jai Bhim everyone. Welcome everyone for the Ambedkar lecture series, which we organized when during pandemic we have started organizing it twice a month. So today we have Professor Gary, eminent professor of Arts and Design History, Loyola State University. He is also former intern director of African American Studies, Loyola State University. And the topic which he is going to talk today is criminalization of Dalits, African Americans, and Jews of Christian Europe. So I welcome Gary to go on and please speak about the topic. Gary, please.
All right, thank you. Good morning. Jai Bhim. I want to thank the Boston Study Group for inviting me. What I'm going to talk about today is something that is a sort of total from having spent over 50 years studying in India. It's not the only thing I studied about, but it's one of the great conclusions I've come to. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit in a chronological order so you can see how I got here. Criminalization of Dalits, African Americans, and the Jews of Christian Europe. Thoughts on caste, race, and the social orders of medieval Christian Europe. I went to India first in 1963, so before a lot of you were born. I went as a graduate student in the history of art from the University of California, and I went to study Hindu temples. Handsome stone religious structures built throughout the last 2 millenniums in India, not that different in the end from the great Christian Gothic cathedrals and things that we have lasting from the same time in Europe. But I went to India to study them, which meant studying Indian culture, because you know what a building is about, you know what goes on in it, you know how it works in terms of what the society around it uses it for, how they treat it. So at the same time that I was studying these temples, I was studying traditional Indian culture of the period that built them. And of course, to study them, I went to India and I had to study the Indian culture I was living in. This is S.K. Torat, who came to my university around 1980, where I was teaching at Iowa State University. Up till that time, when I studied these temples, I knew that the caste system existed. Everyone in America has heard of the caste system. I knew that it was a difficulty in India. I didn't know how it was or where it was, you know. And to be honest, I spent almost 2 decades there with very little awareness of it. If you're an American studying in India and you're studying largely in English, which you can do all over India quite easily, almost all the people you know are upper caste people, and they're not pointing out the caste system. They're satisfied with it, and they're not interested in talking to Americans about it. In fact, most of the people who teach in American universities from India are upper caste people, most of them Brahmins. It's not that they're trying to hide the caste system so much as it doesn't interest them. They're above it. They profit for it the same way whites profit by white supremacy. So it's taught in a different way. The temples aren't any different to them to look at than they are to me, but they understand different things about them. When Torat got to my university, he's a Dalit, a very important writer in India, and eventually an important political person in India. He was the head of the University Grants Commission, the head of all Indian government universities for a period. Taught as a Dalit. And with him, I was able to learn a little bit about how Dalits look at temples differently than the caste Hindus do. In fact, I'd already taken a picture of Dr. Ambedkar, who you see here in a statue on the road near Ajanta. I used to go to Ajanta because it's a famous site of Buddhist art. And I saw this picture on this image on the side of the road in the 1960s, went up to it, took the photograph, and then reading the plaque down below, you see there the little white square in the middle of the squares on the platform. It said Bodhisattva Ambedkar, right? Ambedkar was a Bodhisattva. I didn't know that at all, although I had heard of Ambedkar. Again, I'd been in India many years by then and didn't need to know, really had no reason to know much about Ambedkar or the caste system or Ambedkar's relation to Buddhism, which he brought back to India in a very important way in the middle of the 1950s. But with my interest in the caste system, I went around looking for things to think about. And there was this image of Dr. Ambedkar on the cricket Maidan in Mumbai. It's about the same time. They're both from the 1960s. In fact, they're probably the two earliest images of Dr. Ambedkar in India. This one is so early. It's the first big city image of Dr. Ambedkar. Today, these images are ubiquitous, but that's because of what Dalits have done with them since the 1990 and the centenary of Ambedkar's birth. You notice here's Dr. Ambedkar with that famous position, hand outstretched and the finger raised, but he isn't holding the Constitution. Pretty soon after this image was made, Dalits demanded if anyone wanted to put up an Ambedkar image that, like this one on the road near Ajanta, you can see in his right hand, a little bit out of sight there, but in his right hand, Constitution of India. Of course, Ambedkar is important to Dalits for a lot of reasons, but he's important all over India as the main author of the Indian Constitution. Well, I studied these images, began writing on them. I had a chance to meet other Dalits. This is Trimbak Goble, who was a professor of political science at the Kalina campus of Bombay University. And he took me up to Mahad. This is the Mahad tank, which every Dalit knows about because in the 1920s, Ambedkar conducted a Rosa Parks style civil disobedience there, which led to a 10-year court case and eventually the opening of all public facilities in British India to Dalits. The British totally agreed with and kept up with the Indian caste system until that moment when they were in India and running the government. One point I want to get at is, although Goble is the kind of Dalit I could meet, most Dalits are not university professors, very, very few are. The vast majority of Dalits are landless laborers in the villages. And in the cities, Dalits are among the people who are most important in managing the waste system. This man you see at the top of a manhole up to his shoulders in filth. This is the job that is not only left to Dalits in the Indian cities. In fact, they're pretty much by caste confined to it. Now, I'm interested in this image. A lot of Indians, even my Dalit friends in Delhi, don't want me showing pictures like this because they're rather humiliating. But in fact, here is where we are, a dangerous job and certainly a humiliating one. My family is plumbers. I've been raised around plumbers. Plumbers are the ones who handle waste in the Americas. We do it by digging ditches and laying pipe, finished bathrooms. In India, the sewer systems don't work. Dalits have used to clean them out. Today in Mumbai or in Delhi, somewhere in India, at least one Dalit will die cleaning out these sewers, which are left that way in part because it's cheaper for the government, in part because it humiliates and kills people they don't care about. Right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about caste in India. When we think of having learned who is dying in greatest numbers in American society from the epidemic, from the pandemic. It's poor people, people of color. It's based on race. And in India, similarly, caste is defining who is suffering the most. This is my one picture I'll show you that I took of a Dalit. This woman is cleaning up horse droppings in the street during the Dussehra parade in Mysore in 1980. The Dussehra parade is like the Rose Parade in Los Angeles, Pasadena. Every year draws 500,000 to 1 million people to watch marching bands and floats and policemen on horses and so on. This woman's standing out in the middle of the street. I got up to take this picture thinking, are they going to yell at me? Are they going to see me? Are the people around me going to see me as an ugly American trying to take a picture of India's dirty laundry? Nobody cared that I was doing it at all. They were ignoring her as much as they were ignoring me. But to me, this woman who had to go out in the street and clean up the horse droppings in the middle of the parade, right, it humiliated me. Well, that basket beside her is something that any of us who've lived in India would recognize. That specific kind of basket is the kind of basket Safai Karamchari used to carry away human feces or horse droppings. The only question to the one who's lived in India and seen it is she going to carry it away on her hip, or is she going to hold it on top of her head, which she would be forced to in most villages in Tamil Nadu? Okay, well, so as I learned more about the Dalit situation, I was able to talk about it at my university. You know, if you study India, I mean, one of the things you become is a kind of ambassador, and I was welcomed and treated very well by people in India of all castes. I didn't know what caste I was talking to. People treated me very well there, and I wanted people to know what a good place India was and is, you know, as good as my place here. In 2001, there was a conference in South Africa sponsored by the UN, World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance. And it was a question of which countries, which examples would be faced in this UN conference and would be sanctioned by the UN committee that dealt with these things. And a group of Dalits were in Durban, South Africa, trying to get caste recognized as a kind of racism. The Indian government fought back and in that case won the day, saying that racism and casteism were quite different things, that race wasn't the same as caste. So coming after that, there were people writing on both sides, doing different kinds of things. Balmurali Natarajan, whose name you see there at the bottom, Paul Greeno and I arranged for 2 conferences, one at the University of Iowa, one at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where we brought Dalits to the US for the first time to discuss Dalit issues by Dalits themselves, but where we talked about the comparison of race and caste. My own contribution was this. It was called, and the reason I'm giving you this book cover and the name of the articles, I want you to be able to look these up if you have any interest. I can only do a sketching sort of job talking about it for a few minutes here. It's a long, detailed article with lots of facts. And so, why compare Dalits and African Americans? They're neither unique nor alone. That was my conclusion. I looked at Dalits for a long time. Having lived near and in the Black community in the US, I was quite aware of how Blacks and whites interact in the US. And my wife is an African American, so I'm watching this a lot of the time. And so in India, where we have both lived, we certainly have seen how Dalits are treated. And it's just assumed it was the same kind of thing, right? The article starts off with the statement that Dalits and Blacks are different people. They look and act in different ways in different cultures. They're not the same thing, but they have very similar social situations. It's like languages. They speak quite different languages with different vocabularies and different syntax, but they're each speaking a language. So here's a set of comparisons I used in order to show how much their social situation is alike. Segregated residence, the cherry in the ghetto. All right, the cherry is the word in South India for the Dalit part of the community. Villages are strictly segregated by all the different castes. Dalits usually in the far south of the village, just like the ghetto here. Marriage segregation. Segregating marriages, only marrying within particular castes is a means of trying to create, right, different races, right? If you're all from totally different sets of people, you really are a different race, and the caste system tries to do that, as the American race system tries to do that, tries to create whole lineages. It doesn't work, of course, but symbolically, it can be thought of as being there. And in a village, everybody knows who everybody's parents is, so you can segregate people very effectively. Terrorized. You can only keep a system like the Indian caste system or the American race system in existence through terror and brutality, right? Lynching was common in the US up through World War I, had a kind of a break after World War I, but now we see it in its later remnants in the police murdering of unarmed Black men. Atrocity, that's the Indian name for the killing of numbers of Dalits. And it's constant in India, we hear it everywhere, and it's a matter of upper castes attacking lower castes in order to keep them in line, in order to keep the system what it is. Denied education. During slavery, there were laws in the Americas, much like Manu's laws in India, forbidding the lowest castes to learn the language of the sacred texts. Both countries have confined their Dalits or their Blacks to second-class schools, or would we say third-class schools. Denied economic opportunity. Dalits, like African Americans, are not simply among the least employed, they are selected for outright exclusion from many professions. Denied political participation. Up until a certain point, both were banned from any political participation at all. Now both are allowed to participate, but as we saw in the last election in the US, it's not just Democrats who were legislated out of voting. Specifically, it was Black people. Exploited economically. The entire cost structure of both nations is constructed around the ability to pay the people of these communities below what others are paid. And exploited psychologically. In both cases, status of everybody is apparently lifted. Well, everybody who isn't Dalit or Black, right? Listed because the Dalits or Blacks are pushed down below them. Well, you all seen this recently. Here is Isabel Wilkerson, whose current bestseller, Caste, The Origin of Our Discontents, is, well, a major bestseller in the US today. The main point I'm making here is the one that Isabel Wilkerson makes as the basis of her book. Race isn't a problem in the US because white and Black people automatically don't like each other, or one is better than the other, or thinks they're better. The problem of race in the US is the same as the problem of caste. It's a problem of hierarchy by birth. You're born into a particular group, and because of that, not anything you do or can do or would do, but because of what group you're born into, you're put into a hierarchy where you are above or below, right? Whether you are in the dominant group or the dominated group, right? That's her point. That's the first point she makes in the book. So in that way, race operates in America like caste does in India, and that's why we put the two together. The problem was not color or ritual purity, which is the way that is discussed in India, where there is no color difference of any significance. The problem is hierarchy. What I saw was not two different communities, different in their physical aspects or in their cultural natures, but two communities that were treated in the same way. The situation of social and economic exploitation by both cultures was the issue. Whatever a white person in the US thought of their own social status or their own economic status, Blacks worked for less. less than they did and had a social status that was higher. You could even hear people say it, at least I'm not black. Same is true in India's world of caste. No matter how low a member of the Chaturvarna, the four Varnas, no matter how low a Hindu fell in that system, Dalits were below them. And that was my conclusion. And I'm giving you at this point, I'm going to add the juice to it next. But that was my conclusion after looking at the two. And so working on their issues, as politically we would want to do, is a matter of focusing on economic exploitation. That was the conclusion I reached. Taking my understanding and my new orientation toward caste, I went looking to see other ways I could take my art history training, my looking at images and art and people in pictures, and learn things about the Hindu temples that I'd never done before. Now I'm talking about the year 2000 or so. This book came out in 2013. So 2010, I'd been working in India 40 years by then, studying Hindu temples still, as well as Dalit issues. And there were things about the Hindu temple I never knew until I tried looking at them through the lens of caste. Now, this is a plan of a large Hindu temple in the south. The temple is the darker image in the very center there, surrounded by a couple of different courtyards. Everyone who studies India knows that Brahmins are in the sanctum of the temple and other people are outside. That seems to be a religious issue, like minister at the center of a church. But what I learned when I went looking for caste was a little different. Of course, I understood that Brahmins were the religious teachers, those who prayed, and others would maybe be outside of the temple. That the people who built the temple might be different than the people who operated the temple. That didn't seem to make much difference. What happened when I went reading the texts, like the Maya Mata, was that there's actually a supernatural grid that underlies this structure. It's the basis of planning for the Hindu temple. It's the basis of planning for Rama's palace in the Ramayana, or for modern village and city planning. At the very center is the purest neighborhood, the purest area, the Brahmasthana. Surrounding the Brahmasthana is the area of gods, the Daivyasthana. Surrounding that, the area of gods, is the area of men and women, the Manushyasthana. And surrounding that, the area of ghosts and demons, the Paichasthana. Going back to the temple, I found texts that were quite explicit about the fact that not only did Brahmins go into the sanctum, but it was other Brahmins who surrounded the sanctum, and then it was Kshatriya, the warriors who surrounded in the courtyard, surrounded the Brahmins area. Vaishyas surrounded, a little further out, surrounded the Kshatriyas and Shudras. And it was outside the walls that Dalits were. That wall around the thing excluded Dalits from the temple itself. In fact, in India today, 70% of public temples exclude Dalits. This is what one of those great temples looks like from the air. The temple where the god is that little tiny building at the very center of this picture, the little pink, the little somewhat yellowish towers coming up from the pink area. The tall yellow towers, the largest towers on the corners, are the gateways. The gateways are actually larger than, more important than, bigger than the sanctums themselves. Here's one of the gateways to Madurai. The Meenakshi temple at Madurai is one of the most famous and largest in South India. And so I have pictures of it. And when we look at temples, and what I was always trained to do looking at temples was you looked at the images of the gods, you looked at the architecture of the towers. But what I was learning now to look at was two figures near the bottom. If you go to the, you can still look at that dark square of the cavern of the inside as you walk into this giant building. On either side at the bottom, there are in gray two stone images of door guardians. Here's one of them. Door guardians are in fact the largest images on all traditional Hindu temples. It's rather amazing. The largest images, larger than any man walking by, but if you compare to the images of the gods up on top, the largest images, it's fascinating. In fact, the largest images of Hindu figures in all of traditional India are door guardians. These two dancing figures outside the Shiva temple at Tanjavur. Isn't that fascinating? Well, we don't study them much in India. We just call them door guardians, and they're the guardians of the temple from what we never studied to see. But looking at more texts, I found that the temple is open in the morning, and this is the Meenakshi temple in this simple, almost cartoonish diagram. You can see the big gateways as one would. The temple is opened each morning by the priest walking from gateway to gateway, asking the door guardian for permission to enter. The reason for the door guardians, and they're at every single doorway inside as well as outside, is that different people are confined to different regions. The point of the door guardian is to keep the impurities out of the temple, to keep the wrong people out of the temple. Although there are no images of Dalits in Hindu temples, not in the old traditional ones I've studied, none of them that I've been able to find, there are images of door guardians, right? Giant images, what in English are called by a name most of you don't know. My professor of Chinese and Indian art loved the word apotropaic. It meant keeping out the evil. Door guardians in Indian temples, the largest images on Hindu temples are there to keep Dalits out. Right? They're to ward off impurity, to ward out the Dalits, who the Brahmin defines as impure. Well, in the second decade of this century, I've been unable to travel to India much. We had other things going on at home which kept us nearby. So I studied a little bit in Europe, and I was looking at the European buildings similar to Hindu temples, Indian stone churches from the same kind of period, and seeing if I could apply what I learned in India about how a temple fit into its culture, then how does a church? We all saw on our televisions last year, that was only a year ago, the destruction of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, probably the Gothic cathedral that most Europeans, most Americans knew, in that terrible fire. Well, that Gothic cathedral comes from the same period. It's much larger than that Hindu temple I just showed you, but not as large as the Meenakshi temple. So not as bigger than the one I showed you in the first slide, not as big as the one I showed you in the one just previous. So I was studying these Gothic cathedrals and studying the culture that went around them when I ran into this image, and of course, more important, the philosophy around it. Traditional Christian Europe was divided hierarchically into castes. They don't talk about it that way, but that is the way it is, and everybody knows it. Of course, as you know, the aristocracy doesn't intermarry with commoners, right? They think of that as the aristocracy and commoners, but of course, if the aristocracy doesn't intermarry with commoners and commoners don't intermarry with the aristocracy, you've got two separate genetic groups. You've got what can be considered, and they did, of course, consider them as separate races with different qualities, right? We still have a fuss made over aristocrats, kings and queens, and who the King of England or the Queen's son marries, and so on. Well, here's an image of the three orders that were called in Christian Europe, the medieval three orders. And when I give you the definition of these three people, anybody with an understanding of Indian tradition will recognize them quite quickly. Reading from left to right, we have those who pray. This is the way it is said. These are almost exact words. Those who pray, those who fight, and those who labor to support the other two. Now, that's an almost exact translation of the Purusha Sukta, the oldest shloka in Indian Sanskrit literature, which defines the four Varna. The four Varna are made up of those who pray, those who fight, those who own the farms, and those who labor to support the other three. In the Christian European situation, those who fight, the lords, are in fact the owners of the farms too, so they take up both of those shapes. But those who labor to support the other two or the other three, that's what makes this social system and economic system It also shows you how closely related they are together. 3 separate castes. Those who pray in the European system don't intermarry with anybody, so they are again a separate group. They're made into a cosmically second group by the ordination as priests. What you don't see here are the Jews. But then if you look at the Indian Chaturvarna system, and this is where things start becoming familiar to me and really intriguing. In the Chaturvarna system, you have the 4 Varna, the Brahmin, the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, the Shudra, right? Dalits are not part, they're a unorthodox caste. They're the Panchama. But in the Brahmanical system, they talk about the 4 Varnas and try to ignore the fact of what they've done to the 5th group. Same thing in Europe. The Jews put themselves, the Jews in Christian Europe were in the same place as the Dalits are in India, as Blacks are in the US. They were the people at the bottom, considered to be criminal, considered to be the enemy. In India, you're the enemy if you're defined as impure by the Brahmin. In the US, you're the internal enemy if you're Black, not white. In Christian Europe, the Jews, the only religion allowed to exist, they wiped out or eliminated all other religions. You were a Christian, a Roman Catholic, or Jews were allowed because Judaism is the earlier precursor from which Christianity develops. When you hear of the Christian Bible is 3/4 Hebrew texts, Jewish texts. They're interpreted differently by Christians than they are by Jews. But in fact, Judaism is there within Christianity. And in the Middle Ages, Jews are treated as these evil people who refuse to accept the Christian way of doing things. That essay comes out in this book, The Radical Ambedkar, Critical Reflections, edited by our own Suraj Yengde, who may be with us today, but certainly everyone in Boston knows Suraj for the work he does. And the essay I'm talking about is this one, number 3 on the list, Criminalized Castes, Dalit, African Americans, and Jews in Christian Europe. I'm giving you these things so you can go look them up later. I really think you'd learn a lot more from the detailed essay than you can today, but at least today you get pictures, so there's the difference. So here is where I compare the Jews to this to that definition, to that social situation that both Dalits and Blacks were in. Segregated residence. Jews were forced to live in separate Jewish quarters in the Christian towns. Those were called ghettos. Ghettos, actually the ironmongers region in Venice, which was one of the earliest ghettos, and that name spread throughout Europe. And so where the Jews were called the ghettos. Of course, that's what we put on the name on where Blacks are forced to live, segregated in the US today. And that name has even moved on to India, where we use the word for, again, segregated housing. All right. Segregated lineage, marriages. Jews were not allowed to marry Christians or Christians Jews. They were there was an attempt to keep them as separate castes, separate races. Terrorized. Europe's pogroms began as soon as Christianity did, with the Roman Empire's embrace of Christianity, Roman Catholicism as its state religion. They weren't so bad until about 1095, when the Crusades to the Near East heated up, and from then on, there were regularly bouts of Christians getting together and terrorizing and killing numbers of Jews. This died out in many ways by the 19th century. At the beginning of the 19th century, Napoleon opened the ghettos, and the Jews were not forced to live in these places closed in every night. And things were, I think, more and more convenient in most places for Jews in Europe until, as you will all remember, during World War II, the Nazis slaughtered 6 million Jews, right? 2/3 of all the Jews in the world at that moment. Denied education. Europe's public schooling came originally from church schools to which Jews were not admitted, and much of the advanced learning was in Latin, a language of the church, again, one the Jews didn't share with everybody else or much of anybody else. Denied economic opportunity. Jews were famously excluded from most occupations because the guilds that people belonged to for an occupation were church-associated activities. They couldn't own land because they couldn't swear for the Christian charter. They were really limited very much in the occupations they could hold. Denied political participation. Jews could not hold an office in either the church or in the state in Western Europe. Exploited economically. Jews were legally the slaves of the king or other great lords. In fact, often that was the local bishop. They had to work for the king or the bishop, but they weren't pushed down nearly as much as blacks were in the US or Dalits are in India. In fact, working for the king, some of them got to be very, very wealthy. I can explain that to you later if you want to ask. I hope you realize we're going to be able to take questions at the end of this talk, and you'll be able to ask me about things here that aren't clear or that you want to know more about. Psychologically exploited. Jews were obsessively persecuted by Christian clergy, particularly. The reason Jews were hated as they were by some parts of the population in European Christendom was that they didn't accept the Christian religion, right? They believed a lot of the same things. They believed in one deity. Their texts were such that they could be used as Christian texts, but they didn't accept Jesus as the deity. So the clergy in particular resented that. So what does recognizing the Jews of Christian Europe as a criminalized caste add to our consideration? If the Jews of medieval Europe are demonized or criminalized in social situations comparable to the Dalits in India or blacks in the US, what can that tell us about the shared social situation? Because there are some contrasts. To begin with, the Jews are a tiny little group of people. They weren't 1% of Christian Europe, not 1% even. And they weren't economically exploited at the bottom. So they weren't discriminated against for the same reasons. What was the reason? It took me a little while to come up with one, but the one I've reached is to me quite enlightening, and it's the reason for this entire presentation today for me, because as I've tried to learn about these two things, and we all are trying to understand, why do our different societies work this way? What counted for the Christian elite was that Jews had a different religion and rejected their own. They were thus supposed to be an internal enemy whose suppression gave the ruling elite an excuse for the hierarchy of inequality within which everyone else was graded. It legitimized having a hierarchy where the elite could own more, have more, be considered better on lots of levels, because the elite was there to protect you from the Jews at the bottom. In fact, everybody could be graded by how close they were to the elite and how far they were from the Jews. That works out very well for the situation of Dalits in India or for the situation of blacks in the US. Being legally able to, or even warranted to, brutalize one community by calling it impure, by calling it inferior, allows the elite to hold their position more strongly. The same way that elites in every country use foreign countries as enemies, the same way that India uses Pakistan as an external enemy to pull the Indian community together as a whole, or the US uses the Soviet Union or China or the Arab world as an external enemy to unify the population inside. An elite can use a criminalized community, a community that they try to make into criminals, a community they define as criminals. They can use that to divide the local community, the internal community, into a hierarchy which they can rule, which they're on the top of. Economics comes into it, but the main issue is a political one. How does an elite maintain power? And having a criminalized minority is a very effective way of maintaining power. didn't want to get too far today without mentioning Anand Teltumde. You all know of, I hope my phone stops pretty soon. You all know Anand. Sorry about that, I am. You all know of Anand Teltumde in Boston Study Group. All Dalits know of Anand because he's one of the most important writers in India today on Dalit issues, one we get a lot of information from, and one who was locked up on trumped up charges by the Indian government last April and put into a prison where, of course, prisons were all more vulnerable. Anyone in a prison is much more vulnerable to COVID and the pandemic than anyone outside of it, right? He's criminalized, right, as a Dalit, and certainly as a Dalit intellectual who tells us about the world. Those of us in Boston saw him when he came here 2 years ago to attend a conference at the University of Massachusetts on Dalits, on caste and race. There he is observing the wreckage of what was the only Dalit-owned printing press in Mumbai 3 or 4 years ago. Anand has informed us, as Dalits inform us all about where our democracies don't work, right? They're the canaries in the coal mine. I'm going to show you one other thing before I stop. My main point was that our discrimination in the US of African Americans, our discrimination in India against Dalits, like the discrimination against Jews in the Middle Ages in Europe, and still continuing on some levels up till today, is on the basis of this political agenda that elites can use it effectively. Since I showed you where Dalits appear in the Hindu temple, I thought I'd show you where where Jews appear on the Gothic Cathedral. Among the Europeans and Americans watching this who haven't seen a Hindu temple before, they'll recognize this as a Romanesque or Gothic cathedral. This is Bamberg Cathedral. Every cathedral in Europe, and some of us have gone to see a number of them, some of us have seen them in classes at the university, some have seen them in books. Every European cathedral has a picture of Jews on the outside, of the defeat of Jews on the outside. That probably wasn't taught to you. And of course, I didn't see it until I started studying deeply and until I went looking to see, because if Dalits have a place in the Hindu temple, well, what would be their place of Jews in the cathedral? That gateway that you could see, that one door on the north side of the church, it's the Prince's Portal, it's called, because it faces the Prince's Palace. And the two largest images on either side of the doorway are on the left, Ecclesia, the church, and on the right, Synagoga, the synagogue, or Christianity on the left, Judaism on the right. Here are details of the pair from Strasbourg Cathedral, where the pairs are better preserved, and you can see what the symbolism is like. Ecclesia, the church, carries a banner with a cross at the top. She's crowned, she's the queen. She carries a chalice from the Mass in her left hand. On the other side of the door, you find synagoga, the synagogue. She's not crowned, she's bareheaded. She holds a spear that is broken, right? The Jews were the chosen people until God chose differently, chose the Christians. That's the Christian story, right? If we get a little up close, we can see, again, the crown, the cross, the chalice, or the blindfolded synagoga. Blindfolded, she cannot see the truth. That's the image. And these images are on every cathedral, every one. You have to look to find them today, but they're there. At Notre Dame, the image was so destroyed over the years that in the 19th century, when the church was restored, they had to make a new one, but a new image of the victory of the church over the synagogue. Well, here we are back at Bamberg. You can therefore see synagoga in her blindfold, very subtly broken spear in her right hand. Down below her, right down below this large image, you see a man appearing from the column, reaching down and grabbing the head of another man. That's the devil coming to take away the Jews, right? That's Bamberg Cathedral with an image of the devil coming to grab the Jews and take them away. The persecution of Jews in Christian Europe was a 2,000-year-old effort. It really parallels the 2,000 years of the persecution of Chandals and then the people we now call Dalits, the people who up until recently were called in English called untouchables. I'll show you one more image from the cathedral. You see these ranks of people lined up on either side of the door, 6 men on each side with a man standing on top of each. The men on top are Christian martyrs. The men below are Jewish prophets. The martyrs stand upon the prophets. The way Christians say that today is, of course, that Christianity stands on the back of Judaism. It's come afterwards and is benefited from. The way Jews may look at it is the same way we look at the caste system standing upon the back of Dalits. Here is the Christian elite standing on the back of the Jews, standing on their heads, standing on them. And this is the last image I'm going to show you because it really answers some of the question I answered in that second essay. This is our Dr. Ambedkar. It's the image in New Delhi opposite the Parliament. The standard Ambedkar, the one who has the pointing hand, but also the book now firmly in his hand. That book, of course, is the Constitution. And this is the image that, as most of you know, stands at the Lok Sabha in New Delhi, pointing at the Congress buildings, which you can see there on the left. Ambedkar is a great man for Dalits for many reasons. He is the founder of Navayana Buddhism, which many Dalits follow, and certainly the most important person in Indian history as far as seeking equality for Dalits in modern India, in the democratic state of India, where all are supposed to be equal in the same way that all are supposed to be equal in the United States. Ambedkar is in India, however important for Dalits, he's the father of the Constitution. He is the most important symbolic figure for democracy in India. He is their Statue of Liberty, right? And indicates the political direction, the political possibilities, because if we develop our democracy to where everybody has an equal part, it doesn't matter whether Hindus think Dalits are less pure than they are, as long as they have equal chance at earning a living, at buying a house, at going to school, they'll be quite happy. So democracy, the political solution, seems to be the one I've learned is most important for seeking a better life for Dalits in India, really a better life for all Indians in India. And that's the story I've come here to tell you today. Let me finish by saying Jai Bhim, and I hope our leaders can take us out of the shared screen and we can see each other. And if you have questions, I'd love to talk further about this or answer questions you have. Oh, there I am. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gary, for the wonderful talk. Before I have questions, I will ask anyone, if anyone has any question, please raise your hands so that I can unmute you to ask the question. And people who are coordinating on Facebook and YouTube, can you please take questions from that forum as well? Yes, we have first question from Sanjay Bhagat. Can you go ahead, please?
Yeah, so Gary, thank you very much for coming to Boston Study Group, and it is very insightful. We came to know about so many new things from this lecture and the presentations. So one question I have is, when I look around here in USA and look around in India when I was there, so status of the Dalits or their conditions in India and status of the African Americans here in USA seem the same. I mean, so there may be some minor changes or minor upgrade, but otherwise they go through the same situations what they were facing 100 years back or 50 years back. But when I look at means, and that may be my reason because I may have a very limited knowledge about the Jews. But what I know that they control this financial sector, and if we consider within USA also, many of the Jews are in a very higher positions and all this. Israel is a country which basically is envy of many countries from the development perspective and all this. So do you think that the Jews of today are in the same conditions as the Dalits in India or the African American in USA or anywhere else?
That's the perfect place to begin. Jews are relatively insignificant in our economies. There are a number of very well-off Jews. In fact, in the United States, the two communities that are wealthiest by religion are new Hindu communities that are here. Yeah. And the Jews, they've done very well in the US economy. But Jews are still a very tiny number of them, a very insignificant number. Yet they still have this definition, the Christian definition of the Jews, as moneylenders. In traditional Europe, some of them were moneylenders. The only way they could be moneylenders, this is often forgotten or maybe totally forgotten, the only way a Jew could collect on a debt in traditional Christian Europe was if the king sent his army. The Jew didn't collect debts on his own. He couldn't own a soldier. He only operated as an agent of the king, and the kings and the archbishops who had control of the Jews let them operate because that's how they got money back from their barons and other lords. Most Jews were in fact fairly poor. And the Jews were never the greatest bankers in the world, but Christians have gone on thinking that because the Christian church, and this is a shame for Roman Catholics who have apologized for it, and for many Protestant denominations, which have also some apologized for it. But it was the church that kept going after the Jews, largely because they denied the divinity of Jesus, but also because in the Abrahamic world, in the world of the Jews and the two religions that have come after Judaism and used both of them, Islam as well as Christianity draws from Judaism. The rule was, and you can find this in the Old Testament, you may take interest on a loan from other people, but not from your brothers. So Jews could not take interest on a loan from other Jews, but they could take interest on a loan from Christians. Christians, on the other hand, could not take interest on a loan from other Christians. So it was a sin, not one that couldn't be dealt with easily enough by going to church and saying the right prayers, but it was a sin to take money on interest. So the Jews were legally able to take money in interest, and that's why the kings and the archbishops and bishops used them. But in fact, they were a small part of the situation in Europe, and eventually, because you can't run farms, much less any kind of capitalist commercial activity, you can't run any kind of commercial activity without loans and without finance. So, but eventually Italians and the French from Cahors and different places simply moved into that situation. It was the church that tried to define the Jews as usurers and to define usury as against the rule. So Jews, it was Christian bankers in Florence that were ruined for 5 generations when King Edward III refused to pay back his loans. Jews never had that kind of power, but they got that kind of reputation. Jewish bankers aren't the most important bankers in the world today. There are some important ones, but they're not the greatest bankers. But we're still stuck with that definition, adhering to them the same way that if you talk to Brahmins today in India, some of them would say, well, I know that purity stuff, that's ritual, that I don't believe that at all. But you know, they have these dirty occupations. So I mean, you didn't want one in the house, right? It's one of the ways that the old traditions have hung on, even though we've in many ways lived without them. I hope that answers most of that question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Dada Sahib, I have a few questions, but I will ask afterwards. Let's others have.
Yes.
Oh, let me actually answer one other part of that, which is to say, are the Jews in the same place today as they were then? And of course, they aren't. They're doing very well in the same way that the US didn't allow Indians into the country after the new race laws of the 1920s, but now allow Jews, now allow Indians to migrate to the US. Jews today are doing much better than they did way back then, very well. I mean, unquestionably in the US. But you yourself here, if you follow the news, when a synagogue is invaded by people with machine guns in France today, or in Germany, or as recently as the 1940s, right, 2/3 of the Jews in the world were slaughtered by Christians in Europe. It wasn't all Christians, it was the Nazis, but the point was, it was Christians still slaughtering Jews. So, and this is probably the worst thing I can say to my Dalit brothers and sisters. It really is. I mean, when we look toward getting over this terrible thing, and we see some progress in different places, 2,000 years later, the Holocaust in Germany, those things don't go away. You know, we can get better and better, but it's never going to be automatic or easy.
Okay. Dada sir, Professor Queen has the question.
Yes, Professor Quinn, please go ahead.
You're on mute. They have to unmute you.
Yeah, Professor Queen, you're, yeah.
Chris, we can't hear you.
You have to unmute on your own machine, maybe.
No, he's still muted.
Still can't hear you, or I can't.
No, we can't hear you.
Professor Quinn, we cannot hear you. Still no.
No, we can't.
Point to your
Maybe we can try a different one, and you can try and get Chris open.
Professor Quinn, we cannot hear you. I think there is some problem with your audio. So yeah. Otherwise, you can post your question in the chat box and we will ask Professor. Thank you. Go ahead, Dada sir.
Yes. Okay. Gary, I like before anyone asks, I have one question. Like as you just now explained about how Jewish, like maybe like from your talk, I could understand that the atrocities against Jewish, Dalit, and Black, like African Americans, has been kind of similar form. As you said that the problem was hierarchy, not like race or any other thing. So even the histories are very of different level. But right now, when we see the socio-economic and political situations of these three communities or races, whatever we say, or castes, we say, I find maybe I'm wrong or right, I don't know, but I find Jewish are in better position than the other two communities.
Unquestionably, Jews in most of the world today, Jews are no longer being persecuted in the same ways. And what I was saying was that some of those things have hung on, and there was that horrifying, devastating outbreak. Now it's only 75 years ago. It can always come back, but otherwise, no. In the West, in Western Europe, the place I'm most familiar with, religion is not so much at the heart of all things, right? Priests don't have the power they did once then, and certainly we've gotten over it. When I was saying one of the most terrible things is to think of how that could happen even after 2,000 years of this, and even after improvements. In fact, things have gotten better, and mostly it's gone away. When I said that 70% of Hindu temples did not allow, I think I said that, 70% of Hindu temples do not allow Dalits in today. That outer wall is a tremendous barrier, and many people have fought against it. It's in the big cities, the big city temples, where the government laws have, because governments contribute to them, have made them open to everybody. But in fact, 30% of temples do let Dalits in. So there's progress there too, as terrible as it is. Our reservation laws and affirmative action laws have had an effect, but not nearly the effect. Now, Jews are pretty much out of where they were then. and Dalits and blacks are still very much at the bottom. So you can see progress in each case, and yeah, Jews aren't equal to blacks or Dalits that way.
So my second part of question was like, what did this community did differently than the black and Dalits?
Ah, all right, exactly. That's the kind of thing I was wondering.
At different level. That is what I wanted to ask. Like,
yeah, in fact, they didn't do anything. In each of these cases, it isn't what blacks do. It isn't what Dalits do or what Jews do that was the problem. It was their society taking advantage of them. In this case, in each of these cases, it was the elite who found it to their benefit to make these people into a internal enemy, to tell the population as a whole, you see, I'm taking care of you, I'm keeping these people back. I'm making you better than them. It's what the elite does that counts in this case. That's why I'm calling it really a political issue. Yeah, no amount of Dalits no longer eating meat, no longer eating beef will help at all. No longer would, it doesn't matter what your job is as an elite, you can be a university professor like some of the people in the Bombay study group, you know, but that isn't going to help you. That isn't the real issue, right? The issue is that some people are benefiting greatly by the discrimination, and it's the elites keeping us where we are.
Like Professor Quinn has posted his later on, question on chat. I will read that for you. He says that Jews, unlikely Dalits and black, have a classical literary culture that goes back to ancient times. In fact, as you say, 70% of the Christian Bible consists of Hebrew Bible. Can this be a cause of anti-Semitism that is different from the caste system affecting Dalits and African Americans?
The Jews have an ancient literature, and it's been incorporated very much within Christian literature, so European and Western literature. It certainly has been useful for them and helped them stay together as a group. In fact, the reason the Jews were used by the kings and bishops of the medieval Christian world was because they were literate and could keep records in the way that very few Christians of the times could. And that's one reason they were favored then. I don't know what that has on the progress. You know, the main thing that's happened in the West to change this, as I said, people are much less, spend less time in churches, spend less time with their religion. We have a much more secularized society. That's one of the things that's been different. But in Europe, in the 15th century, 16th century, 17th century, we had a religious revolution. And the Roman Catholic Church, which was the only church that existed up until that time, was divided up until a whole lot of different sects. But the Protestant sects and the Catholic sects then warred for years with each other, killed each other off in desperate. Christians have killed more Christians than anybody else has killed Christians. You know, the civil wars and like that. And the way that the Christians have learned to come out of that, and bless them for doing it, was they realized that you can't kill somebody to make them in your religion. And so we've created a larger secular section, a larger secular world in Western Europe and the Americas than we have in India in a way. And therefore, in the way that they've learned to be more moderate with each other, they've been more moderate with the Jews. They simply let those old religious things dominate less. So that would be my answer. There probably are more sophisticated answers if someone's have looked at that longer. The main point there is that it doesn't matter what the Jews do or what the blacks do. Blacks can't be hardworking enough or even go to school enough. You can do better for yourself in this country if you go to school and get an education, right? But the most effective thing blacks can do to change things, right, is what we just saw in Georgia: vote. And Dalits and blacks were kept out of the government for many years, but in a democratic society, and India is as democratic as the US. We keep in practice trying to reach that theory, and the closer we get to it, the more equal we will be.
Thank you. Now I will read out two questions by Lori. So she asks that is there any role of internalization, belief in self, low worth that has helped maintain this system? And the second question is, can you speak to the role of self-segregation as in the Jews selecting to stay together as a group on precaution?
Persecution.
Self-segregation is definitely there with the Jews. If I said that as I did, that the Jews weren't allowed to marry Christians, Christians didn't allow Jews to marry Christians, but Jews didn't allow Jews to marry Christians. Communities have better and worse rules, customs, laws. Some of them you like more than others. I'm a Jew. One of the reasons I didn't study this until late in life is I didn't want to study my own community as much as others. I'm not a religious Jew, however. Judaism is a religion for many, but for many of us, it's our ethnic background. I'm not religious at all. So I'm not a Buddhist, I'm not a Hindu, a Christian, or a Jew. But certainly having that literature, having that literacy in that language helped keep the Jews together. I'm saying nothing they did would have helped them more or less. What every community does do, and here's where the psychology I talked about a little bit in terms of the first part of the talk. What you think of yourself is going to be affected by what the community around you thinks of you. If you were raised as a Jew and people are telling you, and Sanjay brought up the big thing that you're told, oh, you're a Jew, you love money, right? You love money more than God. Yeah. You're immoral when it comes to money. You can be told that, you can say that's ridiculous, I'm not like that, my mother's not like that, but the point is, you wonder if it's true. Somebody says, you're ugly because you're black, or you're ugly because you're dirty because you're, when your whole society says that to you, it's hard not to worry about it. Is that true? Maybe it's true and I haven't noticed it, So psychologically, we are affected. We were colonized by our communities, and some of us just get in and say, well, that's the way it is. But again, it's what is done to us socially. It's not something that people would do for themselves if they didn't have this community doing it to them. But it is difficult to escape. I hope I answered both those questions. I'm not sure I did.
Pawan Shinde raised his hand. Pawan, do you have any question? Oh.
So I guess you'll have to use the chat to get questions to this gentleman, but I think these are the right questions to ask. Yeah.
Dada Sahib, please check whether Lori has any follow-up questions on that or she's okay. You can unmute her.
Type it into the chat, Lori.
No, you answered my questions well, thank you.
Oh.
I guess I do wonder, Jews, I love those parallels that you made throughout the presentation, and it is striking to me that Jews managed to largely get beyond these situations. And I do wonder, for instance, in some other communities, what some of those obstacles are. And I do wonder about how much some peoples might lack a belief that there is the possibility of change.
Yeah, I think that is the biggest worry. And if it can't change, then you might as well give into it and try to do your best within it, which you have to do anyway on someone just to get along. Let me call attention, we're all looking at Lori because she was speaking. In the background behind her, there's a painting by Chagall, right? Chagall, Jews embrace Chagall as one of the great Jewish painters of the 20th century. And he's a wonderful artist, many of us, anyway, a famous man. He converted to Christianity. That was his way of surviving, right? So the Jews have held on to him. He converted. In India, we have used conversion as an attempt to escape being a Dalit. And those who have converted to Buddhism, right? And that's millions of people since Ambedkar's creation of Navayana Buddhism. Millions of Dalits have converted to Buddhism because it's a way of saying, I'm not a Hindu, I don't believe in this caste stuff. And it's been psychologically very effective for them. In the same way in the US, Blacks have converted to Islam in large numbers because they didn't think Islam was damning them in the same way that their Christian religion had damned them. The Blacks have several separate we have the African Episcopal churches and so on, because the white churches, were discriminatory. So trying to convert your religion is a way out. In Germany, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if you'd converted. If they could prove that you were once a Jew, they made you into a Jew again. But certainly many converted and escaped. And in both places, it's harder in India to escape than it is in the US. In the US, you can only escape if you get whiter. But many people do. Many of the people we think of as white, right, have large percentages of Black background. But as they've gotten lighter, it's been certainly much easier to live in the white world than it was in the Black world. In the Indian village, however, which is where most Indians live, in small villages, everybody knows everybody. There's no way of escaping. You're trapped, even though you don't look any different. People know who's who, and they will kill to make sure you stay who they want you to be.
So, can I ask, how did the Dalits that managed to move up, like the professors that you speak of, manage to break out of the caste system?
Well, they haven't managed to break out of the caste system. There's a very fine writer, and there's a very fine writer at Duke University who's written an essay on just this. Well, why, especially those who have gotten good jobs and so on, why do they still keep calling themselves Dalit? Why don't they? Because everybody knows who you are. If you're going to get married, and Indians use the newspapers and ads, marriage ads, the first thing in the marriage ad is, what is your caste? The Indians marry by caste even more than Americans marry by race. And we don't have the honor killings here that they have there, that will assault you. We can move away and disappear into the world. In India, you can't move away, you can't disappear. People, if you're sitting at a table for too long with somebody for some reason, they'll ask you what your caste is. Well, first they'll just ask you your name. And if it doesn't tell them what your caste is, then they'll ask you, well, who's your father, or who brought you here, or so on. And eventually they'll just say, what is your family? All right. The affirmative action of the US, and affirmative action has been in India much longer than it has the US. Affirmative action has created a whole new world for Dalits to climb up economically and educationally. It is required that certain percentages of people in every body of legislature and in every school should have access by Dalits. But, and that has made us now a second generation of university professors. But it's a tiny number of people. And of course, they're treated as the Dalit professor. But certainly what's happened with women, I mean, because discrimination against women and gender has been just as evil as against caste, throughout the world. And you can see us getting better. I mean, you can see us triumphing over it in some situations. In the universities today in the US, women have really gotten a tremendous amount of success as becoming professors and teaching in every possible vein. And that's happening in India as well. Some of the major writers in India today are Dalits, and everybody is reading Dalit literature in India, or a large percentage of people, because they become literate by being allowed into schools at all. So it's a struggle, and people can make progress, but you still are who you are. The Catholic Church is, because it's a big body with a real hierarchy, they've apologized several times for this anti-Semitism that came out of the church. But we still had in Boston last year a Catholic school chanting at a Jewish school, a high school team chanting, "Jews killed Christ, Jews killed Christ." So something they've been doing for all these years doesn't go away easily. Yet we see it going away. I mean, we are able to do things about it.
Hi, Gary. It's so nice to see you.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, it was a fascinating, talk. I absolutely loved it. I had a question about, there was this time in Indian history where actually some of they call tribes, denotified tribes, they were actually criminalized. So like it was put in paper that these tribes are criminal tribes, and and that definition kind of expanded to include Dalits at some point of certain castes. So that was like, criminalization on paper, like they are criminalized. It was set in stone. Have you seen something like that in the other communities that you have, kind of worked with?
Yes, for the benefit of those of you who haven't studied India, the British just defined certain groups of people as not criminalized. I mean, when we say criminalized, when I say this, I mean they've been treated as criminals. No, the British actually defined certain communities as criminal communities. So you were officially called a criminal community. In the West, gypsies, right? Gypsies, the people we call gypsies, people who call themselves Romani, right, are Indians, are in many, to a large percentage of their genes. Indians who came out of India from the tribal areas in central India. Lombardy has become Romani, and they're all across Europe. They came out through Egypt, right, through India by land through Egypt. And so in Europe, they're called gypsies, Egyptians, and we call the word gyp, right? The Romani are treated as criminals. They're treated that way. They've been criminalized by the Christian community there, and in this community, even to a sect, and we have a word like gyp. The way this works in this country is Blacks are in jail, right? The imprisonment of Blacks is immense, and for the same things. We all remember the crack and cocaine differential. For the same exact actions, Blacks are arrested more often, tried more often, given longer sentences. And in India, the same thing goes on with Dalits, right? The number of people, I was never able to find the articles that would do it there as they are here, but they're coming out more and more. In fact, Teltunde has published some of this. The fact is, Dalits are the ones in jail where upper caste people go free. And again, the same social situation, what you do to a community you can demonize, which is the same meaning as criminalized, you try to make them into demons. There are people who believe in demons. Those of us who don't believe in demons already can ignore that. But yeah, it's the way an elite, right, can stay in power by defining other people as the opposite of the elite. Brahmins can define themselves as pure by defining somebody else as impure. And then those who aren't one or the other are in between, less pure, more pure. The difference between Dalits and racism and casteism and what we call economic class, right, is that you can change your economic class, right? You can employ somebody or you can be an employee, but you can't change your race. You can't change your gender. Those are permanent.
So would you say like this, the basis of all of this kind of situation would be like more, yes, of course, power and privilege, but it's also like othering, because you are othering.
Yeah. Othering is a very effective way of protecting yourself. If you're we talk about psychologically protecting yourself. Well, those people are different than me. They won't understand me, or they're different. We don't know what they eat. But socially, right? We have to think of these things as socially, not psychologically, but socially, othering is the way that an elite keeps itself in power, right? I'm going to protect you from those Mexicans because they're the dope dealers, they're this or they're that. I mean, that is the basis of a fascist approach to things. Yeah.
Thanks, Gary.
So Gary, in this contest, what Jasprit has asked, and you have already mentioned during your lecture that Anand Teltumde was arrested and he is in jail. And in fact, the people who started that Koregaon, Bhima Koregaon riots, they were out of the jail or they were arrested at all because they are from the upper caste, and whereas these people who are arrested in the same contest are from this underprivileged or oppressed community. So that is just to tell you the difference. So I think we have one more question, Dada Sahib.
Yes.
From the YouTube.
Yeah, Pawan Kumar Shinde is back. Can you please ask your question?
Yes, to unmute.
It is from the YouTube, he said, so I think that question has come from YouTube. I will just read on behalf of Dada Sahib or the YouTube caller. How you connect the farmers' agitation in India with Dalits? So I'm not sure, Larry, you are keeping, Gary, you are aware of
I'm
this.
enough up on it.
Okay, so please.
At this moment, there's an immense agitation going on in India. I mean, it is calling the country to a standstill. The government of, what is that? The current government has been trying to make the capitalism work a little better in India. It's a business government, and they've changed laws that will make farmers even more subservient to big finance capital than they are now. And so there's been a tremendous reaction against that. And it's known all over the world. How does that affect Dalits? So, well, Dalits have very small part of these farming things because they're mostly landless laborers who have to work for those farmers. The situation is much like the one we know about rape. We've heard so much 3 or 4 years ago about that terrible rape that occurred in Delhi when that woman was grabbed by some men in a van, right? And they beat up her boyfriend and they raped her and killed her. And it became a national and then an international terrible event. And it was a terrible event. She was a college student, a young woman in Delhi, and she was assaulted and killed. And nothing makes it, nothing is more terrible than that as a rape and as a murder. The most common level of rape in India is the rape by upper caste men of Dalit women. If you have a feed like I do, a regular news feed of the big city newspapers in English coming out of India, and they're all over India, there are rapes every day of Dalit women by upper caste men who think it's their right? The same right that it's just there. And then often they kill the person so the person can't complain about it. It's a horrifying, that is socially where rape really stands in India. But we hear about it only when it happens in an upper caste community, the upper caste community that has access to the newspapers and can complain about it desperately. So it was a terrible thing that happened then, but socially in India, rape is used more often as a way of assaulting Dalits. The current government that's in there in India today, the BJP government, got there by assaulting Muslims, which they are trying to make un-Indian, trying to say that Muslims, which is about a 12, 13% of the Indian population, are not Indians at all. So religion can still be used in the same way that caste is, but about 17.5% of the Indian population are Dalits, and another 12.5% of the Indian population are so-called tribal people. And that's where the real split in Indian culture is. So the farmers' agitation, it's good, it's getting attention, and we hope something is done for it. But yes, I mean, they need their rights and to be defended against big capital. But Dalits are still there. Yeah, that's the best I could do.
Yeah.
Before reading Professor Quinn's question, Pawan Kumar Shinde is back. We want to ask you a question, Pawan Kumar.
Dada Jai Bhim.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Am I audible? Okay. First of all, I would like to offer my thanks to the Boston Study Group for this great opportunity. And thank you, sir, for your elaborate lecture. My question is, sir, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was one of the first person to support Israel as a nation state and Jews. When Brahminical forces from India opposed them. But now, in 21st century, Jews have made common platform with the Brahminical forces in India and not Dalits. Why? This is my first question. And second question is, do you think that there is a need for Jews, African Americans, and Dalits for a common platform?
Easy answer to your second question, which is yes, they need to get together. We need to get together. If enough minorities get together, we will be the majority, and that's how we will triumph. It's not the Jews who've gotten together with the Brahmins in this case, although some of the Jews have. We're talking about the state of Israel, which is a state, and it represents Jews in the way that the BJP party represents Hindus, which is to say elite, successful Hindus and some with power, but not everybody. Israel is an apartheid state. I mean, those of us who are Jews who hope that there would be an Israel, you know, and there would be a place where Jews would be safe, which is how it was created, because Jews were tortured in Europe for 2,000 years and needed a place to go. And after World War II, many escaped there. And then the English who owned the Palestine gave it to the Jews because they needed Jews more than they did Arabs, not doing very well by either. So, you know, Israel is a problem for us, and Israel does combine itself with other states in bad ways. But there are Jews in Israel, and certainly Jews outside of Israel, who are much more feeling of allied with Dalits. In the United States, there's an interesting coalescence and political sharing between Jews and Blacks. They vote very similarly, and they support each other more than any other two communities you can think of. That's interesting. In fact, remember I used these words like pogrom and ghetto, which have moved all the way to India, because intuitively, without even somebody like me trying to make an argument for it, intuitively we see these people who have been othered, as she just said. These people have, we know they have a lot in common with each other, and Jews in the Americas have really coalesced with Blacks consistently in an amazing way. The Ku Klux Klan, which is famous for its assault on Blacks in the US, assaulted Jews as well as Blacks. The garment that the Ku Klux Klan wears, that white peaked hat and those white, that's what the Inquisition church wore in medieval Europe, right? You know, but there are many Christians who've gotten away from that, you know, and certainly many Christians, most Christians would condemn them totally. And so, yeah, Israel is not, as a government, in the best place. They're looking for, well, they're a government looking to protect their own interests, and they're not a necessarily safe place in the Middle East where they are. But of those people in this country who would be most interested in Jews and in Dalits and the issues, you find Jews as well as others. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I will read Professor Queen's question. Given the tiny percentage of population that Jews occupy in Europe and the US, how do you explain their comparative success in overcoming structural discrimination compared to Dalits and Blacks? The presence of democratic institutions does not appear to explain this. I suspect that Jews' ancient culture, tradition, literacy in particular helps to explain this.
Well, I think for one thing, their literacy certainly was a help, which is to say, the Jews who came here from Europe, my ancestors who came mostly at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, between 1880 and 1920s is when most Jews came to this country. And even though many of them, well, you know, people don't immigrate as middle-class people. Today, Indians immigrating to the US are people with real money, most of them who come to make real money. They're coming because they can better themselves economically. But most people who came up through World War II came like the Mexicans who come here today because they're trying to find a place to survive, coming from a place where they couldn't, where it's so bad they were willing to leave their families and so on to move. But those Jews, the Jews' literacy meant that Jews kept literate no matter how poor. To read that Old Testament, to read that, those Jewish literature. The women worked so the men could go spend the day. This happens in one of my cousin's families today in Israel. The women worked so the men could spend their day. So they came here literate, which got them quickly into white collar jobs as opposed to blue collar jobs. The biggest thing that's happened to make the Jews flourish comparatively in this country and since the medieval world, as compared to what Blacks and Dalits have been able to do, is that it was the coming of democracy. The fact is the church has very little power in the Western world today. And it was the church that was busy persecuting Jews mainly. The secular world didn't care that much. And as Europe has become much more secular, as the Americas have become much more secular, I think that's what's allowed Jews. Also, they could pass. Very many probably did simply pass. You can't tell a Jew on the street. And most Jews are living in cities as opposed to the countryside. And in the cities, you can disappear in a way that you can't in the countryside and the village. That's as close as I can come to a quick explanation. But it's a good question, because you'd say, if the Jews were able to do it in spite of all that, then how can Dalits do it? And one way Jews have done it in this country is by getting getting an education can help you climb up in our kind of a country, in India as well as here.
There is one interesting question, I would say discussion point by Florian. So she writes, thank you so much for your talk. I'm afraid my question is slightly off topic. I'm a university teacher in Germany, and I'm wondering whether you or perhaps also the organizers have any suggestions as to what can or and should do to support Dalit exchange students, or even help increase the percentage of Dalit students selected for such scholarships.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that. I do know, and maybe somebody else somebody in this group though may know, and can answer that better than me. One thing that's going on in Europe right now is the fact that the Romani have recognized tremendously over the last decade, but probably before, but I've been hearing it more and more over the last decade, the Romani have realized that they are Indians, that they are Dalits. And in fact, there's connections being made internationally. And in fact, in all of these things, what Dalits like those in Boston can do for those back home of making people familiar with it. We complained, many of us, that Barack Obama talked about Gandhi and not about Ambedkar. But in fact, Barack Obama knows a lot about Ambedkar now. People have been talking about him. Nobody in the US knew about Ambedkar a generation ago. Very few people know about him today. They know about Gandhi. Gandhi certainly was the most important Indian of the 20th century, by any kind of measure, because he was the leader of the freedom movement and it was so effective. But Ambedkar probably is the most important Indian of the 21st century. And as people learn what he stands for, right? What many Americans don't realize is Ambedkar got a doctoral degree at Columbia University around 1916, 17. And there's a statue of Ambedkar at Columbia University in one of the colleges. We have connections. He was here and he used much of what he learned here and took it home. And he made this analogy. Ambedkar realized, and Dalits in general realized, a kind of connection with what Blacks are doing in the US. I think by sharing back and forth, we have a chance of pulling each other up, of learning from each other's situations.
Okay. Dada Sahib, just Sanjay here. Dada Sahib?
Yes, are you saying?
Okay. Yeah, so just thanks, Florian, for this question. And this is a good segue to let everybody know from the audience here about the Boston Study Group, because I see a lot of new faces or new names, and I believe this is because today Gary is our speaker. So just I wanted to let know about what is the Boston Study Group. It is a not-for-profit Ambedkarite organization in USA, working in New England states of America. Boston Study Group founded 5 years back to spread the awareness about the caste-based discrimination in India, its impact on lives of millions of people, and a dehumanizing lives so-called untouchables of Dalit have to endure. We do this by organizing studies of Baba Sahib literature, sponsoring the conferences on these issues, providing financial support to deserving students from India to attend such conferences, and providing humanitarian help in situations like the COVID, what we are going through now. So this type of the activities we do, and there is in collaboration with the other organizations, Ambedkarite organizations in USA, we had started one other organization called as Jain, Global Empower Network, and that is basically to help the students, to mentor them to come to USA or the other foreign countries from India for the higher education. So if we get your email address, and we can reach out to you and see in what way we can collaborate to get this financial aid for the students who are coming from so-called oppressed communities. So that is just I wanted to let you know. And Dada Sahib, I have a question for Gary, and that is what. I had 2 or 3 questions, but that most of them are already answered, especially when I asked about the Jewish community. And my follow-up question is same what Dada Sahib had. So thank you very much for doing this one. Uh, Gary, throughout your session, you have used the word Dalit throughout this session. And I'm not sure whether Professor Thorat or Anand Tumde will like them to be called as Dalit now. So that is one thing. And so like it is same thing like what I think African Americans, we don't want to call them Negroes anymore, correct? So, or I was reading on the internet, I believe for the Jews, the kaik is the word they use as a derogatory terms or something like that.
It's considered a real slur, yes.
Correct, correct. So, and we, means especially the people who converted to the Buddhism also sometimes feel the same way about the word Dalit. But it is a very catch-22 situations because we don't want to call them, but at the same time, this particular word has been so much internationalized or so much used that there is no other way to describe them if we wanted to describe the untouchables or underprivileged people from India, correct? So in what way we can address this situation? Because we, after conversion to the Buddhism, we don't consider ourselves as untouchable because in Buddhism, there is no caste system. And that was the whole intention of Baba Sahib Ambedkar to come out of the clutches of the Hinduism where the caste system exists, whereas in Buddhism, it doesn't. It gives us the self-identity and it gives us the confidence and all this. And that is what the reason, if you see these Ambedkarite people or the Buddhist people are thriving all over the world, both intellectually, educationally, and on the financially also. So just I would like to know your suggestions, means how we can come out of this particular dilemma.
Let me describe what I understand. I don't know that this is a dilemma, but this will also help people listening in understand a little bit. The people I've been calling Dalits are the ones who, in English, up until the 1970s and probably even up till today, most people in the English language call these people untouchables. That was the phrase that the English government brought out when England had been colonizing India, untouchables, because there was also legal names like the scheduled tribes, right? Or, and so on, and Ambedkar used different ones. The word Dalit is a word out of Hindi or Marathi, maybe both, which means oppressed or crushed. And so one thing that's good about it, well, for one thing, we got Dalit the same way we got black, which is to say up until the 1970s, you didn't call black people black, you called them brown or Negro. It was considered a bit of a slur. My wife's uncle would say, well, you didn't mean black, we're brown. You know, what does that mean? But during the 1960s, as there was a real uprising and standing up of African Americans, another word for them, which we'll get to in a second, the Black Power movement said, no, black is beautiful, you know, black is fine, you just call me this, you know. And we get other people, young people today using the N-word, as we say, that people like me can't even say because it's so horrifying. And that's their way of saying, I'm going to define myself. And in the 1970s in Bombay, a group of poets, half of them Buddhists, half of them communists, and that's how they divided themselves, started calling themselves the Dalit Panthers. They named themselves to some extent after the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. That's its whole name, actually, after the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in Washington and in the US. And I thought when I heard them using that term, I thought, oh, they heard about these people and they know a little bit about them. They're identifying with them, the Black Panther Party for standing up. And no, it turns out they'd read in great extensive detail. They knew exactly what they were talking about. And they were saying, a la Stokely Carmichael, I am going to tell you who I am. I'm going to tell you what to call me. Well, it was a very political act, and many former untouchables today would call themselves Harijans. The Buddhists, who people of Ambedkarites who have become Buddhists, would rather think of it, well, they're Buddhists. I mean, that's who they are, and they should be called what they want to be called. But of all the people who were of the scheduled tribes, or pardon me, scheduled castes in India, scheduled caste is the only one that they all sort of accept. They said, we were the scheduled castes. We can hang on to that. Most Indians in the scheduled caste today still think of themselves as Hindus. The fact that other Hindus caste Hindus won't let them into the temples has led someone like Kanchalaya to say, well, we're not Hindus. You know, they think we're Hindus. No, I'm not a Hindu. I'm a gardener caste or whatever it is. We're looking for names. The useful thing about Dalit is that some tribal people pick it up too, right? Another massively discriminated against group in India. So we don't have one simple term to use. And everyone isn't going to become a Buddhist. You know, we're trying to find a way to escape these things. So I've used Dalit. I've been taught it different ways. I'm surprised I'm still using it if I know Tarat wouldn't use the word, but well, tell me, if we're not going to say Buddhist and we want to include that massive number of former untouchables, what is people will have to choose the word they want and use it till others pick it up. Dalit has been picked up by the nation as a whole, which is to say picked up by caste Hindus. Not that they liked it, but that was the word they were told to use in the same way in America. African American and Black is what people are being told to use, but people are looking for other phrases too, ones that embrace more than just Blacks, right? People of color. And I know Japanese and Chinese and Laotians who see themselves as people of color. So we're trying to find ways to unite where we define ourselves, and we'll keep working on it. So that's why I use the word Dalit this time and intend to use it.
Yeah, I agree. It is a really very, what you can say, dilemma everybody is facing. Means we don't want to use it, but at the same time, when we wanted to convey the message, that is the only word we find that that has to be used. So
I mean,
we understand that.
I think it's Chamars in the area of the Taj Mahal or in Agra. You know, there's a tremendous number of people there who are untouchables, but they say themselves, few of them have become Buddhists. They're Ambedkarites for sure,
yeah.
But they haven't become Buddhists. So, well, that's going to be where our ability to coalesce with each other is. And as I say, this is a political issue. It's a social issue. It's not what you are so much as the way you're treated. And we need to be treated as equal, men and women, right? People of all backgrounds. That's our goal. That's our theoretical meaning of being a democracy in India or here. But in practice, we haven't reached that at all. We're still very crude.
Professor Quinn has extended that discussion. He says some people use the Buddhist term Bahujan or the many folk. What about that?
Bahujan is good that way. Bahujan that's common man, right? Common folks, Bahujan. And that's a good one. And people have used that politically. And yeah, that does seem to embrace a lot. And my friends who have descended from Brahmin families and who aren't caste Hindus at all. So Murli Natarajan, who's one of the editors of that book I showed you at the beginning. He's from a Brahmin family, but I mean, he's interested in justice for everybody, as anybody in this gallery is. And again, he needs the term that he can belong to also. Bahujan is one that many of us can take. Yeah, I like that a lot myself. Common person.
Great. Like, does anyone have any question? Swaroop, are there any questions on YouTube or Facebook?
No.
Okay. We don't have them. We can conclude.
Well, I want to thank people for coming. I hope this was useful. You can all get to me on email. I will answer any email questions. And if you can get back to the Boston Study Group, they can put you in touch with me. So don't hesitate to call me. And I guess I could end my part with Jai Bhim.
Yeah, and Gary, this lecture is available on the YouTube and Facebook also. So if you want to send it across your friends and circle, please feel free to do that. We will send you the link. And in addition to these lectures, we have conducted so far 45 Ambedkar lecture series. All videos are available on our channel in the Boston Study Group. So please visit.
So before concluding, I would like to share some of the observations during this lecture. First of all, thank you, Gary. It was wonderful lecture. Wonderful lecture in from the perspective of like comparing 3 different oppressed communities or races or castes across the globe. So it was very interesting comparison. And the most fascinating observation or comparison which I found was of that door guards of temples and cathedrals. That was very interesting. And now you have given us new perspective of looking to temples and other churches as well. So in future, whenever I'm visiting any such what monuments and all that, before entering that, I would surely see this from your eyes or from your lenses, what you've given us. And being a scholar of comparative studies, which I'm trying to compare in future as a PhD scholar. So your comparison was very interesting, and I would surely use those comparisons or those lenses in future to do that, so that the scholarship remains and scholarship enriches. And as you said, there is need of these oppressed communities to come together and form a force which would become a majority in future and bring equality in this globe or in this world. So saying this, I'm very thankful for your enriching discussion or your talk. Let's hope that in future you have some new interesting topic and research where we could share a platform and we discuss this on Ambedkar lecture series. Saying this, our next Ambedkar lecture series is planned on 14th February. So let's meet on 14th February at 10 a.m. EST. Thank you and Jai Bhim everyone.
Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim, thank you.
Thank you.
Jai Bhim.